I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, feeling completely betrayed by my own family, forced to leave the only home I'd known. But here I am, a 16-year-old girl with no other option but to pack my things and go. I never expected things to escalate like this, but looking back, the signs were always there. It all started with my stepbrother, Liam. He's 17, and up until a year ago we were pretty close. Sure, we didn't share the same blood, but we were family. At least, that's what I thought. But over the past few months, I'd started noticing things going missing, little things at first. My favorite makeup palette. A pair of limited edition sneakers I'd saved up for. Even a designer purse I'd gotten for my birthday. All gone, and it wasn't like I misplaced them. I know myself too well for that. When I confronted Liam, he brushed it off, claiming I was overreacting, that I was being paranoid. But I wasn't buying it. Something wasn't right. I decided to keep a closer eye on things, and eventually, I got the proof I needed when his girlfriend let it slip that she had been getting all my stuff as gifts. My stuff. The things I worked hard for, or had been given as a gesture of love by my mom. And there it was, my stepbrother, stealing from me and giving it away like it was his to take. I confronted him again, but this time, he couldn't lie his way out of it. He admitted it, he'd been taking my things and giving them to his girlfriend. But what hit hardest was how he didn't even seem sorry about it. There was no apology, no remorse. Just a shrug, like it was no big deal. But I was fuming. I'd been nothing but kind to him. This was my stuff, my hard-earned things, and he thought he could just take them without a second thought? But that wasn't the worst part. Not by a long shot. When I went to my mom, expecting her to do something about it, I got nothing. She just didn't care. She didn't defend me. Instead, she asked me if I was sure I hadn't misplaced things. And then, she turned it all around and accused me of making Liam feel like I was holding things over his head. My mom, the one person I thought would have my back, just stood there and let him get away with it. And my stepdad, Rick? He actually defended Liam. He told me I was flaunting my things, making Liam feel bad. As if I deserved to have my stuff stolen. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wasn't flaunting anything. I worked hard for those things. And yet, no one seemed to care about that. I had spent years trying to be the good daughter, trying to earn my place in this family. But in that moment, it became painfully clear. I was just a burden to them. I wasn't important. Not to them. Not to anyone. That night, I packed my bag in silence. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just left. No goodbye. No more arguments. I couldn't live in that toxic house anymore. My mom didn't care. Liam didn't care. Even Rick didn't care. So, I walked out. And as I did, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't an easy decision. I had no idea where I'd go or what I'd do. But I couldn't stay. I couldn't stay in a house where I was treated like I didn't matter, where my stepbrother could steal from me and my mom wouldn't even blink an eye. I just couldn't. So, I went to my dad's. It wasn't much, just a small apartment a few miles away, but it was a place where I felt like I was wanted, like I mattered. It was my only choice. I don't know if I'll ever forgive my mom for how she treated me. Maybe, in time, I'll find a way to. But right now, all I know is that I couldn't stay with her anymore. Not after what Liam did, and not after what my mom didn't do. Living with my dad wasn't easy at first. Sure, it was a relief to finally get out of the house, but it also felt strange. I hadn't lived with him full-time since I was little, and the apartment he lived in was tiny. Nothing like the house I'd grown up in. But it was mine now, and that thought gave me a little peace. At least here, I could breathe. My mom didn't take it well when she found out. She was upset, even angry, and started calling me, begging me to come back. But I couldn't. I had to do what was best for me, and being there under the same roof with her and Rick and Liam, it just wasn't healthy anymore. I wasn't going back to a place where I was invisible, where my feelings didn't matter. But as much as I tried to block it out, I couldn't help but think about what had happened. The betrayal, the lack of support. I started to wonder, was it always like this? Had I just been blind to it before? I had spent so many years trying to fit into this new family, trying to get my mom to see me as more than just her daughter from a previous marriage, But now, it felt like all that effort had been in vain. I started digging into the details of what had really been going on in that house, and it didn't take long before I realized just how deep the problems went. My dad, even though he wasn't perfect, had always been there for me. He was steady, reliable, and he never once made me feel like I wasn't important. And then there was my mom, who had been living a double life. I remember one conversation with my dad that changed everything. It was just after I'd moved in, and we were sitting on his couch, eating takeout pizza, when he casually mentioned something about the child support money. He didn't say much, but what he did say hit me hard. Apparently, my mom hadn't been spending the money on me. She'd been using it for herself, for Rick, and for Liam, buying luxury items like handbags, gadgets, and even a new car for Rick. Meanwhile, I was left to make do with hand-me-downs and whatever I could scrape together. My dad had told me that she'd been misusing the child support all along, and that when I was younger, I'd never even seen a fraction of it used for my benefit. The more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. That's why my mom had always acted like she couldn't afford anything for me. Why she'd always been so tight on money. Because she wasn't spending it on me at all. And I'd never seen it, never noticed, because I was so focused on making my mom happy. I never questioned where the money was going. But now, I felt like a fool. I was angry, and rightfully so. How could she do that to me? How could she pretend to be this caring, concerned mother when all she'd really cared about was herself and her new family? How could she sit there, acting like the victim, when she was the one using me to fund her luxuries? It felt like I had been living a lie all these years. She wasn't the mother I thought she was. She didn't care about me, not really. It was all about what she could get out of me, about the financial support I provided. And that realization hit me harder than anything. After everything that had happened, after Liam's theft and my mom's betrayal, I realized I couldn't keep pretending that things were okay. I couldn't go back to that house, to that fake version of a family. I needed to cut ties. For my own sanity, for my own future. But I couldn't let go completely, not just yet. I still wondered, deep down, if there was a chance for things to get better. Could my mom change? Could I ever trust her again? But that hope faded quickly as the days passed. Every time she called, asking me to come back, I felt more and more certain that I had made the right decision. She wasn't asking me back because she missed me. She was asking because she wanted the money, because without me there, her little financial system was starting to crumble. She didn't care about me, about my feelings, my needs. She only cared about what I could provide for her. And it stung. It stung harder than anything Liam had done. Harder than leaving. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was the realization that the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally had been using me all along. It was hard to shake the feeling of betrayal, and every time I thought about it, a fresh wave of anger surged through me. I kept replaying all the times my mom had made me feel guilty for asking for the simplest things. "We can't afford that," she'd say, making me feel like I was asking for too much. And yet, here she was, living her best life, wearing designer clothes and treating herself to things I had only ever dreamed of. It was like she'd been playing a long con, one that I was too naive to see. I didn't even want to talk to her anymore. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from her or a call, I had to take a deep breath before answering, trying to calm my nerves. Was she really sorry? Did she actually miss me? Or was she just trying to get me back into her grip, to keep the money flowing? One evening, after another lengthy voicemail begging me to come home, I finally cracked. I couldn't take it anymore. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of all these lies. My phone rang, and this time, I decided to answer. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not coming back." The silence on the other end felt deafening. I could practically hear her heartbeat through the phone. I wasn't sure if she was shocked, angry, or just trying to figure out how to manipulate me again. "Don't you miss me?" she asked, her voice soft, almost pleading. "I don't know, Mom," I replied, feeling the bitterness bubbling up. "You've been using me for money. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about that." Her voice went cold, the shift in tone so sudden that it almost knocked me back. "I'm doing what's best for this family, for all of us." You don't understand what it's like to take care of everyone. If you're so unhappy here, then maybe I'm better off without you." That hit me harder than I expected. She made it sound like she was doing me a favor by having me around, like I was a burden she had to bear. I wanted to scream, but instead, I just ended the call. The audacity of it all, the complete lack of empathy for me, it was like she was reading from some script she had written for herself. The next day, I had a conversation with my dad. We were sitting on his worn-out couch, my feet tucked under me, just talking about life. He had always been the calm one, the one who listened, who never tried to tell me how I should feel or what I should do. "You're doing the right thing," he told me, his voice firm. "Sometimes people are toxic, and you can't keep trying to make things work when they never will." I had to fight back tears. I had never heard my dad speak so plainly, so matter-of-factly about my mom. But he was right. She had been toxic, and I had been trying to force something that wasn't there, some semblance of a loving family that no longer existed. Over the next few weeks, I settled into this new life with my dad, trying to rebuild my sense of stability. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. My dad wasn't perfect, but he was always there for me no matter what. He showed me what real love and support looked like. He never treated me like a burden or a financial obligation. He treated me like his daughter. I stopped answering my mom's calls. I couldn't deal with the guilt trips, the manipulation. Every time I did, it felt like I was letting myself down even more. But as I stayed away, something shifted inside me. I started to realize that my mom's love had always been conditional. She loved me as long as I could contribute. Without the child support payments, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. The hardest part was trying to make sense of the memories of all the times I thought she cared. It was as if I had been living in a house built on lies, and every brick I pulled away revealed a deeper, darker truth. But I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't stay stuck in the past. I finally started to feel like myself again, like I wasn't defined by the way my mom had treated me. I was more than her financial tool, more than someone who just existed for her benefit. I was learning to be my own person, to trust myself, to believe that I deserved better than what I had been given. But then came the news. My dad called me one night, his voice quieter than usual. "Your mom's been asking about you," he said. "She's been trying to get in touch again. Wants to talk." I couldn't bring myself to answer. Part of me wanted to hear her say she was sorry, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd changed. But another part of me knew that whatever she had to say, it wouldn't be enough. I had already made my decision. And deep down, I knew it was time to let go of the hope that things would ever go back to the way they were. The days blurred together after that conversation with my dad. I had made the decision to stay with him, but the deeper impact of my mother's actions kept haunting me. No matter how hard I tried to put it behind me, the memories of being dismissed, overlooked, and lied to kept resurfacing. Every time I thought I was moving on, I found myself right back in that moment of betrayal, questioning why it had to happen this way. I spent most of my time at my dad's house trying to focus on my studies, on finding some normalcy. But the emotional toll of it all wasn't easy to ignore. It was a constant internal battle. One minute, I felt relieved to be free of the toxicity, but the next, I felt this heavy sadness weighing on me, wondering if I was making the right choice. Was I making the right choice? My mom's silence was almost worse than the constant barrage of texts and calls begging me to come back. A part of me wanted to reach out, to ask her why she did what she did, to demand some sort of explanation. But the other part, the stronger part, knew that I had already asked for the truth, and I had already seen the reality.
It wasn't about me.
It was about her own needs, her own comfort. The truth had been sitting in front of me all along. One night, my dad and I were sitting in the kitchen, eating pizza like we'd been doing for weeks now, just the two of us. The comfort of those small moments, of having a father who cared enough to listen, was slowly replacing the anger I had been carrying. "You know," my dad said casually, leaning back in his chair, "I think she's still trying to play the victim." His words took me off guard. I hadn't expected him to be so blunt, but it was true. My mom, who had spent so much time telling me I was the one who was wrong for wanting more, was still trying to paint herself as the misunderstood one in all of this. "I'm just tired of it all," I admitted, my voice sounding smaller than I meant it to. "I don't even know if I want to talk to her again. Ever." My dad nodded, setting his slice of pizza down. "I get it. She's been using you for years. But that doesn't mean you have to keep letting her. You don't owe anyone anything, especially not someone who only sees you as a means to an end." His words hit harder than I thought they would. He was right. I had spent so much of my life feeling like I owed my mom something, like I needed her approval or love. But now, I was realizing that no one could give me that sense of worth except for myself. And that was when it clicked. I didn't need to keep chasing something that wasn't real. I didn't need to keep trying to fill the empty spaces with someone who only wanted to use me when it was convenient for her. My mom had made her choice, and now I was making mine. I wasn't going to keep pretending that everything could be fixed with a simple apology. The damage had been done, and I had already moved on. I had already found my place in the world without her. The next day, I gathered the strength to send a message to my mom. "I'm done. I'm not coming back. I'm tired of being the one who's always expected to make things work. I know what you've been doing, and I'm not part of it anymore." It was brief. It was cold. But I needed to say it. I needed to make it clear that I wasn't her pawn anymore. The message was sent, and for the first time in months, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was clarity. I was no longer trapped by the guilt, by the hope that things could be different. I was free from the emotional chains that had bound me to a relationship that never had a chance of being healthy. And that's when I realized something profound. I had finally started to value myself. I had stopped looking for validation from people who only saw me as a tool for their own convenience. I was no longer the child who would bend over backward to make others happy. I was a person, and I had every right to choose who I let into my life. The next few days were quiet. My mom didn't respond right away. I didn't expect her to. Maybe she was processing it. Maybe she was trying to figure out how to manipulate me back into her life. But this time, I didn't care. I had already made up my mind. Then came the call from my dad. He had received a call from my mom, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of anxiety and indifference. "She wants to talk," he told me. "She's begging to meet. But you don't have to if you don't want to." I felt torn. Part of me wanted to meet her, to look her in the eyes and demand the answers that had been denied to me all these years. But the other part, the stronger part, knew that nothing would come from it. Nothing would change. She wouldn't suddenly become the mother I had always hoped for. I was done chasing ghosts. "I'm okay, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done with it all. I don't need to hear it anymore." I could almost hear the relief in his voice. He had always been there for me, and now I was making a decision that would give me the space I needed to heal, to move on, and to find peace. The weeks after I officially cut ties with my mom were filled with a strange mixture of emotions. Part of me felt like a weight had been lifted, like I could finally breathe without the constant pressure of trying to make her happy. But at the same time, there was a void, a lingering sadness that I wasn't sure how to fill. I had spent so many years hoping things would change, waiting for the moment when she would realize how much I needed her. But that moment never came. Now it was just me and my dad. We settled into a new routine, one that didn't revolve around the chaos that had dominated my life for so long. For the first time, I felt like I had a sense of stability. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore, afraid of upsetting anyone or being misunderstood. The silence was oddly comforting, and the peace in our home was something I hadn't known in years. But even with that peace, the reality of what had happened hit me in waves. I had lost my mother, not in the way people typically lose someone, through death or physical absence, but in a much deeper, more painful way. She had made it clear that I was no longer a priority for her, that her own desires and luxuries meant more than our relationship. And while I was angry, and rightfully so, I also mourned the loss of what I had always hoped we could be. The hardest part was coming to terms with the fact that the love I had once craved from her wasn't unconditional. It had always been tied to her needs, her comforts. My presence had only mattered as long as it served her, and once I no longer fit into her version of a perfect life, I was cast aside. It was around that time that I started looking inward, really reflecting on my own worth. I'd spent so many years trying to prove myself to someone who would never appreciate it, but now I was beginning to understand something important. I didn't need her approval. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking myself if I had done the right thing. Would she ever change? Could she ever change? But in those moments of doubt, I thought about everything that had led up to this decision: the lies, the manipulation, the way I had been made to feel small and insignificant. And slowly, I realized that the answer was clear. I wasn't responsible for her happiness. I was responsible for my own. My dad, in his quiet way, had been my rock. He had never pressured me, never tried to make me feel guilty. He had always been there, letting me navigate my emotions without judgment. It wasn't that I didn't love my mom, it was that I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for someone who didn't see me. I had to learn how to love myself first. It was my friends who helped me see this through, too. Ryan especially had been a constant source of support. He'd never doubted my choices, always reminding me that I deserved more than what my mom was offering. He was the one who told me to start focusing on my future, to stop looking back and wishing things were different. Just keep moving forward, he'd said. You've got so much ahead of you. Don't let her keep you in the past. And he was right. The past had its hold on me for so long, but now I was finally starting to break free. One evening, after a long day of school and work, I sat down with my dad. I was ready to talk about what I wanted for the future. I had been thinking about it for weeks, weighing my options, and now I was finally ready to take action. I want to go to college, I told him, my voice steady with determination. I've been looking into it, and I think I can apply for scholarships and student loans. I don't want to wait anymore. He smiled, his eyes full of pride. That's great, kid. I'm proud of you. It felt good to finally say it out loud, to know that I was taking control of my future. It was a big step, one that would push me out of my comfort zone, but I was ready for it. For the first time in a long time, I was excited about what was ahead. The following months were a blur of applications, interviews, and late-night study sessions. It wasn't easy, but I was determined. I had finally found something that mattered more than the past, something that didn't involve trying to win the approval of someone who had never truly been there for me. Then, one day, I received a letter in the mail. My heart raced as I tore it open, and there it was, an acceptance letter to the university I had applied to. I couldn't believe it. I had made it. I was going to college. That moment was a turning point for me. It wasn't just about the acceptance letter, it was about the realization that I could achieve things on my own. I wasn't defined by my relationship with my mother or by her choices. I was carving my own path, and for the first time, I was doing it for myself. And when I told my dad the news, I could see the pride in his eyes. He didn't need to say anything. His smile said it all. I knew you had it in you, he said, his voice full of emotion. In that moment, I realized that I had finally found my worth, not in the approval of my mother, but in my own strength, in the love and support of the people who truly cared about me. And with that, I was ready to move forward, to build the life I had always dreamed of. A few months had passed since I made the decision to go to college, and everything was starting to come together. But there was still one thing hanging in the air: my mom. I had been avoiding her calls, her messages, not knowing what to say or how to respond. I was still processing everything that had happened, the betrayal, the gaslighting, the way she had treated me like a pawn in her game. But even though I had made peace with my decision, there was still this lingering doubt at the back of my mind. Was I making the right choice? Was I being too harsh? Could things ever be the same again? Or had I truly lost my mom forever? It was one evening when I got a message from her that I could no longer ignore. It was short and simple. Can we talk? I miss you. I stared at the message for a while, my fingers hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to respond, to tell her everything I had been holding in, to finally express how much her actions had hurt me. But another part of me wasn't sure if it was worth it. Would it change anything? Or would it just bring back the same toxic dynamic that had already cost me so much? After sitting with it for a while, I finally decided to call her. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I knew I had to confront this once and for all. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been thinking about everything. There was silence on the other end before she spoke. I know I've made mistakes. I've been selfish, and I'm sorry for the way things turned out. I want you to come home. Her words felt hollow. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't ignore the years of neglect, the way she had chosen Rick and Liam over me, the way she had lied to my face. I had given her so many chances before, but every time, she failed to come through. I don't think I can come home, I said softly. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I've realized that I need to put myself first. I can't keep coming second in your life. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, could feel the distance growing between us, not just physically, but emotionally too. She had always been good at playing the victim, making it seem like everything was my fault. But for the first time, I wasn't buying it. I understand, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But I still want to fix this. I still want to be your mom. I closed my eyes, fighting back the tears that were threatening to spill. I had wanted that so badly. But I also knew that I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't real. Maybe someday, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But not right now. We stayed on the phone for a while longer, but neither of us said much. When I finally hung up, I felt a strange sense of closure. The call hadn't gone the way I had imagined, but it was exactly what I needed. It wasn't an ending, but it was a step forward. I knew that I had made the right decision, even if it wasn't easy. Over the next few weeks, I focused on preparing for college, diving into the applications and paperwork, and making sure everything was in place for my future. I knew this was just the beginning, that I still had a long road ahead of me. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what was to come. I had taken control of my life, and I was no longer waiting for someone to give me permission to live it. As the day of my departure for college grew closer, I felt a sense of excitement I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the promise of a new environment or the adventure ahead. It was the realization that I was finally choosing myself. And that was a feeling I would never take for granted. When I packed up my things and said goodbye to my dad, there was a bittersweetness to it, but also a deep sense of peace. I had made it through the hardest part, and now I was ready to take on whatever came next. That night, as I lay in bed, thinking about everything I had been through, I couldn't help but feel proud of myself. I had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, but I had also grown stronger, more independent. I knew that no matter what happened with my mom, I had learned to rely on myself. And as I closed my eyes, I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to start my life on my own terms.